Joining me now to break it all down, criminal trial attorney and former Morris County prosecutor, Bob Bianchi. Bob, thank you so much for being here today. It's a pleasure to have you.
Sure, Alison, great to be here.
All right, so Bob, I can't help but think that if this had happened at a different religious institution rather than a Christian private school, the mainstream media would be reporting on this completely differently. A.G. Garland has even said he isn't sure about the motive. In your opinion, could we be looking at a hate crime by definition?
Yeah, you could be, but listen, the media is always, since I've been prosecutor, wants to kind of get ahead of, no disrespect, of course, that's what media does, the ascertainment of facts, which is very, very difficult in a slow and methodical process. I was just listening to a press conference of the police chief. Federal law enforcement assets are out there. There is this manifesto that could be up to 60 pages long. And so prosecutors will go through all of that, the computer records, the social history. She has a relationship or had a relationship with the school to make a determination as to what the motive is. And so I know that sometimes it frustrates people, but prosecutors are very careful before they start making conclusions as to why a person did a thing or not until everything can be thoroughly reviewed. So could it be a hate crime? Absolutely, it could be a hate crime. And any hate crime, whether it's against a Christian institution, a Jewish institution, a Muslim institution, should be investigated with the same level of aggressiveness as the other religion is. But unfortunately, a lot of times these investigations get politicized. I've been in the middle of it, and all of a sudden the tail starts wagging the dog. I think we need to give them a little time here, Alison, because look, they've been very transparent. This police department not only showed its excellence in bravery and in tactical operations, but also the methodical nature in which they're going about the investigation, releasing the videotapes. They've been very transparent. So let's give them an opportunity to review all the information so that we can get down to what the truthful motive in this case was.
Fair enough. Now, I've heard initial reports which indicate the shooter texted an old friend before committing this atrocity, and the old friend had actually reached out to police prior to the shooting. Now, could that make the town's police liable for not responding to such an important tip?
See, Alison, we get back to facts again, and it's funny you mention this because I was just listening to another press conference where the chief is indicating, let's see what the facts are, that call occurred to the police while the situation was in progress. So timing is obviously important. There's also another permutation here that kind of gets to your point. Apparently, she had called some suicide helpline that may be monitored or run by law enforcement, previous to this. So there may have been some level of knowledge. And it's clear that she was under a physician's care for mental health and emotional issues. And these are the facts that we're learning right now. So obviously, if law enforcement had a knowledge of this, to what extent can they intervene? Tennessee does not have a TURPO or FERPO law like we do in many other states where there's called an extreme risk protective order, where if law enforcement or somebody in the family, because we hear the parents knew she had a gun and they actually didn't want her to have a gun, a lot of times family members will call in and say, look, I think she's at risk. She's got a mental health issue. And a court can determine whether or not those guns will be seized until an opportunity for a hearing can occur. When you don't have that kind of mechanism in the law, it kind of hamstrings the police from really being able to do anything, even if they have forewarning, unless they're literally watching something occur right in front of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned her history of mental health issues and her parents being aware of that and also being aware that she was in possession of the gun that they didn't want her to have. Ultimately, who are we looking at to be held accountable, or what's the ultimate repercussion for the people involved? Could her parents potentially be held liable for this atrocity?
Well, first of all, again, let's see what the facts are, because the parents say that they knew she had one firearm and that they thought, and again, we don't know if this is accurate, we're just hearing reports, that she had given that weapon up, but in fact, she had 7 lawfully purchased firearms that they claim that they did not know about. But to answer your point directly, it's a very difficult case to file against people when the law doesn't even allow people to call into courts and to police and get protective orders to have these weapons seized, to say that they're therefore going to be responsible for it. So from what we're listening to, the parents thought she had gotten rid of that weapon because she had those mental health issues. And I don't think there was really much more that they could have done. And I think in order to prove a civil case against them, which is what this would be extremely difficult under what we now know, or we believe we know the circumstances to be. But I expect a lot more data is going to come out that we don't know about.
Yeah, we'll definitely stay tuned for that. Thank you for your insight there. Now, switching to another crime, the recent stabbing of a senator, Rand Paul staffer, had actually been released early from a 12-year prison term just one day before the stabbing, which I think brings up an interesting point. Who was responsible for the stabbing? Now, obviously, the person who stabbed him committed the crime, but he technically should have still been in jail. So could the jail, or at least the state, be at fault for deeming this criminal as ready for release?
Well, we've given so many immunities to law enforcement. You know, it's funny, depending on where people are in the political spectrum, these issues kind of bounce back and forth, that it would be very difficult, in my mind, to sue the police or the parole system for releasing him from jail, so long as it was done in a lawful way according to the laws of that state. So again, I don't see that as being anything that would be actionable, although it's extremely unfortunate. What I like to know about the case is he's in jail. What was his institutional record like? What are their parole laws to release people? Were those things followed? Was he representing a continued risk to the community? Listen, we have to balance that people are going to get parole. What gets me uncomfortable as a former prosecutor is that you have some jurisdictions in which people are easily paroled for offenses that they shouldn't be, and then sometimes people that are serving massive sentences for things where they should be paroled. It is such a distorted system, and a lot of times a lot of flaws get made. But with a violent offense like this, of course, now it brings attention to the issue, should this person have been released? And until we see what that record looks like from the institution, and we compare that to the laws of that state, it's going to be very difficult. I'd like to know what were the rules followed, and if they were, unfortunately, then that's the reason this happened.
Yeah, definitely. Do you think we can count on the media to cover that story, or do you think it'll be crickets from them?
Oh, I'm a legal analyst. I'm not a media analyst, but I think that, look, it really depends. I mean, you guys will cover it, I'm sure. The question is whether people will ask the right questions.
Yeah.
That's the issue. Will the media go and try to find this data out and then report on it? You know how it is, Alison. Some will, some won't.
Well, we definitely will. Now, moving on to another continuing legal battle in Hollywood. The charges against Alec Baldwin were actually downgraded, but now Alec is claiming that his constitutional rights were violated. What are the updates, and what is your insight into this evolving legal case?
This is a massive failure by prosecutors. I mean, from the beginning, I've been commenting on this case. Something just didn't seem right about the way they were investigating, at the time it was taken. At the very last minute, they were looking for funding for expert witnesses. I'm like, that's the first thing you do before you start to decide to file charges. You got the facts and you want to compare what the legal standards are from experts. So I was really concerned about that from the beginning. Then when they filed these charges, look, I don't care if you like Alec Baldwin, you don't like Alec Baldwin. Everyone's entitled to a fair trial, a fair presentation, and a fair prosecutor. It was such amateur hour to me. And then these prosecutors get thrown off the case because they violate New Mexico law that says you can't be a legislator and a prosecutor. And there's a lot of reasons why that should be. And then the prosecutor has to leave the case. Look, the bottom line, as a former prosecutor, is there is so much suspicion now that's being thrown into this case, all self-inflicted errors by the prosecutors in this case. It's really a shame to everybody, Alec Baldwin, to the victim, and to the public, who deserve better from the